wars happening thousands of miles away. Most people don't experience any of that firsthand. We understand it through the
remarks that are going to frame the urgency of this moment, and then ask and introduce the witnesses and ask them to give their opening statements. My colleagues will be coming in and out today. As you can imagine, there's a lot going on here in Washington today, and a lot of issues we're dealing and grappling with. But again, there is none, in my opinion, that are not speaking as much to this urgency. There are none more important than what this could mean for American culture, Americans' economic strength, Americans' shared prosperity, and to affect the art that sustains so much of who we are as a people. So I'm going to jump in and just say again, thank you. What is at stake is clearly not just a corporate deal, but who controls news, who controls entertainment, who controls storytelling that's such a vital part of America. This forum we're having today is going to examine one of the largest proposed media mergers in U.S. history, one that will affect competition, jobs, creative independence in the entertainment industry, and the integrity and independence of the free press. Combining Paramount Skydance with which already owns CBS News, Paramount Pictures, free Paramount Plus with Warner Brothers, Discovery, CNN, HBO Max, DC Studios, Cartoon Network, would place an extraordinary share of American news, entertainment, and storytelling under a single corporate umbrella. This is not just about corporate concentration and consolidation. It's about the concentration and consolidation of cultural power. And the track record of this kind of ownership is already clear. Within months of Skydance's August 2025 acquisition of Paramount, the CEO laid off approximately 2,000 employees, about 10% of the company's workforce, across CBS, MTV, BET, and other divisions. Approximately 1/4 of Paramount's senior vice presidents and above were terminated. These cuts came on top of a 15% workforce reduction under Paramount's prior leadership in 2024 and a further 3.5% reduction in June 2025, bringing total headcount from roughly 24,500 in 2022 to below 18,000 today. This is not more avenues for creators, as Paramount said 2 days ago. This is concentration of a film industry to just 4 remaining legacy studios, which means fewer projects will get greenlit, fewer of our stories will be told, fewer of our voices will be heard, fewer buyers for creative work, lower wages, cuts across this entire workforce, writers and actors, crews, drivers, production staff, and more. When companies merge, jobs don't just disappear. Jobs are eliminated, and families are hurt, and our economy suffers. On Monday, over 1,000 filmmakers, documentarians, and professionals across the movie and television industry wrote an open letter opposing this merger. They warn, and I quote from that letter, "Our industry is already under severe strain, in large part due to prior waves of consolidation. We have witnessed a steep decline in the number of films produced and released, alongside a narrowing of the kinds of stories that are financed and distributed. When companies merge, jobs disappear. Writers, actors, crews, drivers, production staff, again, the people who make what Americans watch, the experiences that touch our lives, the stories that inspire, the media and the art that expands moral imagination, all of that will be constricted." I don't want to just acknowledge, though, for a second, maybe pun intended, the elephant in the room. It's our Republican colleagues' absence. The Republican Party not willing to come for a hearing on such an urgent affront to so much of what makes America dynamic and our culture and arts thrive. In ordinary times, if allegations of pay-to-play and blackroom deals to get mergers approved by the Department of Justice came to light, the Judiciary Committee would haul officials in to answer to what was blatant accusations of pay to play. If a president made public comments stating his intent to influence a merger so that he can get the news coverage he desires, we would hear widespread public condemnations. Any merger of this scale would receive the highest scrutiny by the Antitrust Subcommittee, of which I am the ranking Democrat. Republicans and Democrats alike, though, would say a merger of this scale and import should have the committee's attention. When it was a different company poised to buy Warner Brothers, we saw that folks were up in arms. The world was on fire. There was a committee hearing scheduled, but now we are having nothing happen. So let me be direct about what a bipartisan hearing would have addressed. They would have addressed square on the allegations that Paramount has promised the president to make, quote, sweeping changes to CNN after Trump said he thinks, quote, the people that have run CNN for the last long period of time are a disgrace, and that, quote, it is imperative, our president said, that CNN be sold. Allegations of political favoritism in the regulatory process is anti-democratic. And the fact that a company seeking approval of one of the largest media mergers in U.S. history has simply refused to respond to congressional inquiries, including a preservation letter signed by 8 United States senators, this is highly objectionable. It says a lot about a company that is so confident its deal will go through that it will receive not adequate and appropriate scrutiny or be subjected to real oversight. It is doing that, not cooperating with Congress, with a confidence that if you kowtow to a president or flatter them or empower them or enrich them, that somehow your mergers won't have to go through the normal scrutiny. They may have the benefit of a favorable environment today, a White House and DOJ alignment, but that's not always going to be the case. And more Americans are waking up to the fact that all the corporate consolidation that's going on, everywhere from the pharma industry to our farming industries, is bad for consumers, it's bad for our economy, it's bad for the well-being of our democracy. And so I'm grateful for our witnesses today. And I want you all to know their testimony, even though it's not in a normal hearing, is vital. We're hearing from people today that know what consolidation looks like, not from a boardroom, but from a newsroom, a set, a writer's room, a union shop floor, and the halls of justice fighting to preserve our First Amendment rights. Paramount has claimed that this merger will give creators, quote, more avenues for their work, not fewer, but history tells us a much different story. Past consolidations offer a clear preview. Within months of Skydance's August 2025 acquisition of Paramount, CEO David Ellison, as I said, laid off thousands of employees. This is a time that is not about expansion of opportunity, it's about contraction. And it's that concentration of the film industry to just 4 legacy studios that brings about a true crisis. I am going to do everything I can in this hearing to not only elevate these voices, but to truly examine the challenges, to truly examine what's going on. While it may be to the benefit of today's environment for people to rush to quick economic gains, we know the long-term consequences for all Americans. This gives us real concerns about how corruption and corporate influence is undermining our democracy. I believe that we've seen this already at CBS. We've seen $16 million settlement with the president of a meritless lawsuit, the installation of politically aligned people, the resignation of the executive producer of 60 Minutes, the suppression of vetted investigative segments, and the exodus of experienced journalists. We now see the desire to extend that same model to CNN at a moment when cabinet officials are publicly calling for CNN's takeover and calling for the FCC, signaling that it should let the deal through. This is not a normal corporate consolidation. There's much more at stake here, which I know we will explore today. I hope today we hear plainly from our witnesses about what this media would mean for media workers, journalists, for creative independence, for the public's right to a diversity and a genuinely independent press. I hope we hear from our witnesses about what this really means for our democracy and the economic well-being of our country. I urge federal enforcers to review this merger fairly and review it on the law, and I look forward from hearing from the witnesses. I do want to bring out, before I introduce the witnesses, just that the probably the most knowledgeable senator on all antitrust issues has walked into my left. I suddenly feel like a beaver standing next to the person who constructed the Hoover Dam. But I do want to offer a moment before I introduce the witnesses, if you want to say any introductory remarks.
Thank you very much. And I will be very brief because I want to hear the witnesses and then have to leave, and hopefully I can come back. But I do want to thank you for holding this hearing. Senator Booker, 2 points. We know that over 75% of U.S. industries have become concentrated since the late 1990s. And right now we have a dysfunctional situation over at the Justice Department where the head of the Antitrust Division, someone that many of us trusted very much, she received 70-some votes for her confirmation from Democrats and Republicans, is gone and terminated around the time or forced out of this consideration as well as the Ticketmaster case. And so this is a major acquisition that would impact millions of consumers, tens of thousands of workers. And I want to hear from the witnesses on this, but that's concern. But the second concern to me as the daughter of a journalist is just the effect on CNN and the importance of that around-the-clock 24/7 news that is very difficult to come by right now, especially with the world that we are in. And so I'm very much looking forward to hearing from your witnesses, and I know that we are in good hands here with Senator Booker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Klobuchar. I'm going to start with David Bornstein. David is an Oscar-winning director and producer whose work focuses on propaganda, power, and the role the media plays in shaping public understanding. His recent film, Mr. Nobody Against Putin. Yes. Yes. 3 yeses.
I watched it. I'll ask you, it was really good. Oh, thank you. Sorry.
No worries. Brought international attention to how quickly institutions can be transformed when media and information are brought under tighter control. David, the floor is yours for a short introduction.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you, Senator Booker, and the committee for inviting me to speak today. I'm here as a member of the documentary filmmaking community, which is in a real moment of crisis. Some of the most important and significant work being made today has fewer and fewer places to exist. And it's not because audiences don't want it, but because the system that decides what gets made and seen is consolidating into the hands of a few players with a narrow and limited view of what audiences should watch. Recently, I had the chance to speak on stage at the Academy Awards in Los Angeles after winning the Oscar for my film, Mr. Nobody Against Putin. I chose to use some of that time to speak against the proposed merger of Paramount and WBD, because I believe this could make the situation for filmmakers like me much, much worse. Why do I think this? As a documentary filmmaker, I've spent much of the last 15 years making films about authoritarian countries, most recently Russia. I've made films about propaganda and mass media, and I've seen how this works as a process. The early stages look similar, regardless of the country. Control over the flow of information consolidates. Storytellers of all types have fewer places to go to tell their stories. What's striking is that free expression isn't lost through overt censorship. You don't need to tell anyone what to say. The pipeline does the work quietly on its own because fewer decision makers control what gets financed and what reaches audiences. This is also important because democracy depends on the stories we tell. Today, more than ever. The world is far more complex than it was in Jefferson's time. Back then, people were voting on issues they could see with their own eyes. Today, voters are asked to make decisions about microchips, global supply chains, AI, and wars happening thousands of miles away. Most people don't experience any of that firsthand. We understand it through the stories we're told. Walter Lippmann, one of the most influential American journalists and political thinkers of the 20th century, grappled with the challenge of informing citizens in an increasingly complex world. 100 years ago, he came to a bleak conclusion. The world is simply too complicated for the average person to keep up. His answer for lawmakers like yourselves was to lean towards technocratic governance, with experts figuring things out behind the scenes while the rest of us are fed a simplified version of reality we can live with. In other words, experts make decisions and we get memes. But that's not the route we the people chose. Instead, we tried something more ambitious, building media systems that could actually serve the public, public broadcasting, editorial standards, and ownership limits. The idea was not to give up on people, but to give them a fighting chance to understand the world they're voting in. And that only works if those systems stay independent, genuinely diverse, and not concentrated in the hands of a few people who tend to see the world the same way. What's in front of us now isn't abstract. The Paramount-WBD merger is a $110 billion deal that would fuse two of the largest media companies in the world into a single gatekeeper, controlling film studios, streaming platforms, and major news networks under one corporate structure. I've recently joined more than 2,000 filmmakers, actors, and writers in citing a letter opposing this merger because we've seen where this road leads. But it also feels kind of different this time. In most countries I've worked in, China, Russia, and so on, leaders are at least pretending that there is a distance from media consolidation. What's unusual about this moment in the United States is the openness. Government leaders are being explicit about what they want the media to look like, and we're seeing regulatory decisions that allow further concentration to move forward. The administration is openly embracing the possibilities of such great media power resting in so few hands. Just think about those terrible possibilities from the perspective of my own industry. The CNN archive holds more than 4 million assets, over 45 years of global broadcast history covering wars, elections, disasters, and political upheaval. The CBS archive adds decades of CBS news coverage and classic programming. Together, these collections represent a huge portion of the American historical record, and they would fall under a single ownership structure with demonstrated willingness to shape editorial content in alignment with White House preferences. These aren't passive libraries, they're controlled systems. Access requires disclosure, legal review, approval. Pricing can be set without any real competition. An archival filmmaker has described being denied previously available footage because it, in the right holder's judgment, showed American soldiers in a bad light while our country was at war. That is a gatekeeping power over the historical record. An emerged entity with strong political incentives to control the narrative, that power becomes something far more dangerous. Independent filmmakers working on documentaries about democracy, civil rights, immigration, or foreign policy now face extreme challenges reaching American audiences, a situation made much worse by the recent closing of the Center for Public Broadcasting. Films that win the Academy Award for Best Documentary, including my own, could not find a US streaming home. In some cases, perhaps this is because major platforms fear the political consequences of carrying them. A filmmaker whose documentary followed Amazon workers' historic union campaign could not find a distributor because of those distributors' commercial relationships with Amazon studios. This is the documented, present-day reality of storytelling in a consolidated media market. The range of buyers has become so limited that American documentary filmmakers are flooding to Europe to try to get their films made there. Of Europe's most important annual events for documentary filmmaking is seeing such an influx of applications from American projects that they don't know what to do with them. We should not accept a situation where so many America's leading and most idealistic storytellers are desperately trying to work outside the country. As documentary filmmakers, we are part of a tradition a century old, built on the idea that storytelling can empower people, strengthen democracy, and unite rather than divide. That only works when there's real space for independent voices. And one last thing. Working in places where a small number of actors control the flow of information taught me something simple. It doesn't just erode democracy. It erodes creativity too. The same forces that flatten political discourse flatten culture. It's not just a dystopia. It's a boring dystopia. I'll close by reiterating the acceptance speech from the Oscars on why it was so important to stop the merger. Mr. Nobody Against Putin is about how you lose your country. You lose it through countless small little acts of complicity. When we act complicit when a government murders people on the streets of our major cities, when we don't say anything, when oligarchs take over the media and control how we can produce it and consume it. We don't have to accept that. We have to stop the merger. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak, and look forward to answering questions later.
That's extraordinary testimony. I'm looking forward to getting to our next witness. I do want to just note that Senator Blumenthal, who's come here from Connecticut, I'm grateful to have my neighboring state here. It's very hard, though, the imbalance now that the population of the Senate of America in California, with the two California heavyweights are sitting here, where there's much of a creative center to the world, have now both appeared here. Senator Schiff and Senator Padilla, we're grateful for your presence. Connecticut and New Jersey may not add up to California in population, but we do our best. We punch above our weight. Miss Katie Phang, please, we'd love your testimony next.
Ranking Member Booker, and the senators that are here, thank you for the invitation to testify today about the impending merger between Paramount Skydance and Warner Brothers Discovery and the threat this mega transaction poses to American democracy. My name is Katie Phang. I'm a trial lawyer, an independent journalist, and a media commentator with extensive experience covering the intersection of law, media, politics, and democratic accountability. I'm here today not as a partisan advocate, but as someone who spent her career both inside the courtrooms and inside the newsrooms, and as someone who understands what this kind of consolidation does to journalism and to the public's ability to hold power to account. This proposed merger is one of the most consequential media consolidations in decades. This hearing must examine it closely because the stakes extend far beyond shareholder returns and content libraries. This merger will reshape the information landscape that hundreds of millions of Americans depend upon to understand their world, their government, and their rights for generations to come. I am privileged to appear before you today as a senior advisor for Democracy Defenders Action. I am free to speak my mind without worrying about that the federal government and its corporate oligarch allies will threaten my livelihood should I report critically on their activities. I'm also acutely aware of how many of my former colleagues in mainstream media do not share the freedom to express their honest assessments about this administration and the behavior of convicted felon Donald Trump. When a handful of billionaires and giant corporations control what Americans watch, hear, read, and ultimately discuss, when they exert undue influence on where those discussions are steered, that is when freedom of speech becomes something closer to a branding exercise than a constitutional guarantee. That is the danger of media consolidation. Our founding fathers did not put freedom of the press in the First Amendment because they thought journalism would be profitable. They didn't enshrine the right to freedom of speech because they assumed everybody would be polite, rational, or even truthful. They did it because they understood something essential and sacrosanct. Democracy cannot survive if powerful people get to decide which facts are allowed to exist and what version of the truth they want to peddle for profits. I have worked for years in legacy media as a legal correspondent, legal analyst, and as an anchor and host at then MSNBC. I've witnessed the chilling effects that consolidation exerts on editorial independence. When executives fear that aggressive reporting might antagonize a parent company's business partners, stories disappear or are rewritten to soften the edges. When newsrooms shrink under cost-cutting mandates driven by corporate restructurings and merger debt loads, investigative units, the ones that hold government and corporations accountable, they are the first to go. I don't speak from theory, I speak from experience. I left MSNBC on May 1st of 2025, not because of a specific on-air incident, but because I understood that democracy was facing an existential threat of unprecedented proportions, and that free speech was going to be one of the most effective weapons against autocracy. But that free speech was especially under attack by a presidential administration led by a vindictive bully who didn't hesitate for a second to target the media and call them enemies of the people simply because he didn't like their reporting. To add insult to injury, the broader corporate environment had rapidly begun to evolve into one where media executives were acutely sensitive to tone and content in the wake of Trump's return to power. That sensitivity was not accidental. FCC Chair and willing Trump lackey Brendan Carr, just weeks after Trump was sworn into office the second time, sent threatening letters to NBC, ABC, CBS, and their parent companies, Comcast, Paramount, and Disney, demanding detailed disclosures about those corporations' quote, promotion of invidious forms of discrimination and violation of FCC regulations and civil rights laws through their DEI and diversity policies and programming. The message was painfully clear. You either bend the knee or face regulatory consequences. And the networks capitulated. Corporate leadership operating under that constant drumbeat of regulatory pressure becomes risk-averse in ways that are invisible to the public but felt immediately by the journalists. I could not, on a legacy media platform, say what I freely say today. That some of Trump's executive orders pursue the ethnic cleansing of this country while prioritizing a white Christian nationalist agenda, that a convicted felon whose name appears more than 38,000 times and counting in the Epstein files is unfit physically and mentally for the Oval Office. These hard and truthful things must be said loudly and without apology, but the voices willing to do so in legacy media are increasingly being cowed into silence as corporate executives grow more and more fearful of the Trump administration's wrath. It is this experience that compels me to urge this body to scrutinize this Paramount Warner Brothers merger with the rigor that the American public deserves. We don't need to speculate about what an Ellison-controlled news looks like. We're living it in real time at CBS. Since the Ellisons installed Bari Weiss as the network's editorial leader, they have explicitly steered the network toward a more conservative editorial line. For instance, 60 Minutes, one of the gold standards of American investigative journalism, temporarily shelved a segment on the CCOT detention facility in El Salvador, where the Trump administration has been deporting immigrants. The Supreme Court recognized in 1945 in Associated Press versus United States that the First Amendment's guarantee of a free press means nothing if private concentrations of power can achieve the same suppressive effect as government censorship. What we face today is precisely that convergence, a federal government using its regulatory leverage through FCC license threats, merger approval authority, and multi-million-dollar legal settlements to steer media ownership towards families it trusts and away from editorial voices it does not. When the government shapes who owns the press and the press shapes what the public knows, then the First Amendment has not been violated in form. The First Amendment has been gutted in fact. When too few companies own too much of the media, editorial independence becomes fragile. News divisions that once had the independence to challenge power become subsidiaries buried under entertainment conglomerates that care more about quarterly earnings than constitutional values. Maybe no executive ever says that quiet part out loud. Maybe there's no smoking gun email that says, kill the story. But human beings are more subtle than that, right? Careers are made and destroyed through suggestion, through silence, through many a raised eyebrow. And so that result is journalists, and they start asking themselves questions they should never have to ask. Can I report aggressively on this company if our parent corporation has a business relationship with them? Can I criticize this politician if the CEO is looking for access to the White House? Can I pursue this story if it's going to upset our shareholders? Those are not hypothetical concerns. We already have a real-world example of Paramount and the Ellisons' willingness to attack journalists who criticize them. Just yesterday, Paramount pulled all of its advertising from The Ankler simply because its editorial director and chief columnist, Richard Rushfield, carried a bag of buttons in support of the Block the Merger campaign. Those are the corrosive realities of consolidation. I have reported on First Amendment law for years. I have covered the cases. I've interviewed the litigants. I've explained that doctrine to millions of viewers. And I can tell you that the framers designed the Free Press Clause precisely because that they understood that a concentrated power, whether held by a king, a parliament, or a corporation acting in coordination with a government, poses an existential threat to self-governance. What this merger enables is not a hypothetical version of that threat. It's an operational one. Every time we permit a major media consolidation to proceed without genuine safeguards, we shrink the universe of independent editorial voices. We reduce the number of institutions that are capable of holding power to account. We make the information ecosystem more fragile, more susceptible to top-down pressure, and more vulnerable to the kind of political capture that ends careers and kills stories. In conclusion, the First Amendment doesn't exist to make life easier for media executives that are trying to squeeze another few cents out of a stock price. It exists to protect the messy, noisy, frustrating, essential business of self-government. It exists to protect dissent and to protect criticism. It exists to protect the ability of ordinary people to challenge the powerful. This body has an opportunity, and I would submit the obligation, to ensure that the Paramount Skydance Warner Brothers Discovery merger does not proceed without robust enforceable conditions that protect the public interest, preserve local news, safeguard independent filmmakers and creative workers, and defend the independence of journalists who serve the American people each and every day. This is no time to bow down to a tyrant. Do not give in to the lies. Don't give in to the fear. Hold on to the truth. And because I am a journalist, I'm going to break news. An American jury has just returned a verdict finding that Ticketmaster Live Nation illegally monopolized the ticketing market. That is the American people that are speaking out, that they don't want mega companies having a stranglehold on industry spaces. It has been a privilege to testify today, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Katie, before I go to Michael, I just want to say that my staff sent me this note that I did not read your paragraph, but I think you have more than shown your extraordinary qualifications and your invaluable contributions to this day, so I'm very grateful.
Thanks.
Michael, I'm going to read your paragraph before my staff yells at me, and say, Michael Isaac is the Director of Legal Services at the Writers Guild of America East, which represents more than 7,500 writers and creators across film, television, news, and digital media. You bring expertise on how media consolidation affects writers, creative workers, and the diversity of storytellers that make it to the screen. Thank you very much for being here, Michael.
Thank you very much, Senator Booker. We appreciate your convening this event. And thank you.
You got to push your mic till it becomes a green button.
All right, thank you. I'll try it again.
All right.
Thank you very much, Senator Booker, for convening this event, and we appreciate all the senators in attendance today. We also wish this was a bipartisan hearing, but we believe that that should not stop us from drawing attention to the grave dangers posed by the impending merger of Warner Brothers and Paramount. By way of introduction, the Writers Guild of America East and West together represents a total of about 18,000 creative professionals. They write for news and entertainment programming in television, film, radio, and cable. Just about all the professional scripted content that you will see on film and television is written by our members. Our members are journalists who work at outlets such as ABC, CBS, and MS Now. We represent writers and podcasters and online media at outlets such as Vox Media, Huffington Post, Slate, and Hearst. And as the representative of those creative professionals, we have for decades called attention to the threat that a consolidated marketplace poses to workers, consumers, and the diversity of content and viewpoints. When the news broke that Netflix and Paramount were bidding to acquire Warner Brothers, our union spoke out forcefully against either merger, because no matter who acquires Warner Brothers, the result of media consolidation is always the same: fewer jobs, fewer options for consumers, and higher prices. While Paramount stands poised to acquire Warner Brothers, this merger can and should be prevented because it represents a further erosion of competition in an already consolidated market for entertainment and a unique threat to a free and independent press. Decades of consolidation have led to a broken system that is dominated by a handful of studios. Today, there are 6 major buyers of scripted film and TV of our members: Disney, Netflix, Amazon, Warner, Paramount, and NBC. These are vertically integrated companies producing the content as well as distributing that content around the world on their own streaming services. If Warner merges with Paramount, that combined company would immediately become the largest employer of our members, a media behemoth with tremendous leverage to reduce content, raise prices, increase control of production, suppress competition, worsen working conditions, and silence the voices of our members. At the same time, Paramount is poised to dominate the news business by controlling both CBS News and CNN. The outcome is not hard to predict because we have already seen the transformation at CBS News in the wake of its merger with Skydance. Under the new leadership, CBS imposed mass layoffs and we believe sought to appease bad faith and partisan critics instead of standing by the journalists who have built its reputation. The outcomes that I describe are not inevitable. They are the result of policy choices, and Congress and our antitrust enforcers have the tools to change course if they have the courage to use them. For those of us who grew up relying on institutions like CBS Evening News, CBS Mornings, and 60 Minutes, it has been very sad and frustrating to see these trusted institutions undermined in the lead up to and in the wake of Paramount's merger with Skydance. Based on recent actions, it is hard to avoid the conclusion that Paramount sought to obtain regulatory approval for its merger with Skydance by appeasing the administration's bad faith attacks on the media. One obvious example is President Trump's baseless lawsuit against CBS News alleging bias at 60 Minutes, which surely would have been tossed out of court like so many other lawsuits against the media had the company not paid a $16 million settlement in July of 2025. This, we believe, was a betrayal of CBS's own employees at 60 Minutes, including Guild members who work at that program and take seriously the journalistic standards that that program has worked to maintain. CBS, of course, denied that the settlement was tied to the merger, yet I believe that its motives became even clearer when it canceled The Late Show immediately after Stephen Colbert joked about the settlement. The result will be the layoff of the entire staff who work on the show, including the Guild-represented writing team. We think that the message to artists is clear. Watch what you say, or you will be next. CBS's appeasement of bad faith attacks on the media did not stop there. CBS acquiesced to FCC Brendan Carr's demand that it appoint an ombudsman to combat allegations of media bias. CBS eliminated its diversity initiatives, disbanded its race and culture unit, and in one instance, one of our members was reprimanded for writing correctly that RFK Jr. spread misinformation about vaccines. That member was among the first to be laid off when Skydance took over. CBS's news programming has increasingly been marked by its new owner, notably by hiring Barry Weiss as editor-in-chief. Her past experience was not in television journalism, but running the Free Press, a website with political leanings that aligned with its new owners. The Free Press writers now routinely appear as commenters on CBS's streaming platform, and its websites are filled with links to Free Press articles. We have seen, as was previously mentioned, well-researched and reported stories on 60 Minutes held back for what we consider to be flimsy reasons. And numerous high-profile departures from CBS point to the same explanation. Those folks have exited CBS because they believe they could not maintain their journalistic integrity while complying with the political demands of the new leadership. Predictably, the Paramount-Skydance merger led to massive job losses almost immediately. October 2025, Paramount cut about 1,000 jobs, including 100 at CBS News, including our members. That was apparently not enough. Less than a month ago, CBS News rolled out another wave of layoffs, this time tragically eliminating CBS News Radio, which had been part of CBS for nearly 100 years. In all, almost a third of our members who work under our national agreement with CBS have either been laid off or pushed to early retirement by accepting buyouts. The employees who have remained at CBS News have struggled to maintain the same level of quality with low staffing levels, working long days, longer weeks. We had been in negotiations with CBS News to provide fair compensation for those employees, and led the entire Guild-represented staff at CBS News 24/7 to walk off the job en masse for a fair contract, and ultimately they did win a fair contract with the strongest contract that we've seen ever for that shop. Turning to the entertainment segment of our membership, as a viewer, it may seem that there are an endless number of places to find content, but in reality, these platforms and networks are owned and controlled by a small number of companies. Most Guild members who write for the screen or episodic television are always looking for the next project in order to maintain a livable income and to provide health insurance for themselves and their families. With a merger of Paramount and Warner, those work opportunities will be fewer. The combination of Paramount and Warner Brothers would create the largest employer of our members, controlling nearly a quarter of TV earnings and over 20% of screen earnings. A combined Paramount-Warner Brothers Discovery Company would control about 33% of the market for highly paid screenwriters, 32% of the market for highly compensated TV writers and what are called overall deals, and 20% of the market for writing This consolidation will stifle competition from independent producers and distributors and make an integral monopoly power over writers and other industry workers, giving outsized control over what content reaches audiences. The vertical integration that these companies exercise means that the players in the entertainment market must be both producers and streaming distributors to be competitive. To be competitive, barrier companies to enter the market, increasing the big companies' control over more production markets and writers. It is rare that you truly get a new market for new projects with multiple outlets competing. In the 2024 to 25 television season, nearly 3/4 of online scripted content on the major streaming platforms were self-supplied. This is a business where competition between employers supports creativity and variety in the marketplace of ideas, but Wall Street doesn't want that. They want more mergers because they want the remaining
For example,
companies to be able to
all
continue
Roy's
to
friends-
raise prices while putting out less content, resulting in consumer
with some very good-looking young man. But Roy never talked about it. He just didn't like the image. He felt that to the average person, being gay was almost synonymous with being a wimp. That was the last thing he wanted to project, so he almost went overboard to avoid it. If the subject of gay rights came up, Roy was always the first one to speak out against them. Tough as he was, Roy always had a lot of friends, and I'm not embarrassed to say I was one. He was a truly loyal guy. It was a matter of honor with him, and because he was also very smart, he was a great guy to have on your side. You could count on him to go to bat for you, even if he privately disagreed with your view.